us through.
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, good
This is
morning.
Ken. This is Ken and the gang here. It's let's see, May 22nd, 2026, and we're gonna do like I guess Q&A. Or what do you got on your mind?
Good morning, Ken. Good morning, Alex.
Right.
Um, it was a very interesting week. There's a lot of interesting stuff that happened. Um, anyway, I want to just touch base on a lot of some market performance, but also I want to ask you, Ken. Lately, you've been sharing with us a lot of your work on AI,
Yeah,
and you sent us a link about something, and I'm feeling a little bit lost in some of the things that you're doing. If you could just
sure.
summarize what are those? How can we better utilize those tools? That'd be great. Everything here if in Austin fine. Getting ready for this next week. I expect continued volatility and hopefully maybe some better news, and we'll see. Got to be ready for everything.
Hmm.
My chicken.
Yeah, Alex, what do you got on your mind this morning?
Um, Good morning. I'm here for a little bit of time until my granddaughter wakes up. But
Right.
I
Yeah,
also wanted to ask, what Luis is asking. Uh, I want to thank you for your Trail Boss series. That
yeah,
helped me a lot to understand, my, I guess, limitations. But there are also like a lot of branches that are out, and having
sure.
understanding where to start or how to follow that will be great. Investment wise, I had a larger drawdowns than I expected this week, and it was, I think, primarily based on my like a allocation to the gold, and there it's took a dive.
Yeah,
Um,
gold was a surprising. That's a surprising move.
and I'm
Didn't
just
see that.
I say trying to understand, do I need to be more tactical on that, or do I need to, otherwise just bear through, and so I'm doing trying to do that analysis.
Yeah, what I would say is, I was Trader X and I were talking about that about gold. We were both sort of independently came to about the same allocations in I would call our tactical accounts, if I could say it that way. And we were both eerily about 80% uh inflation protected treasuries. He was in tips. I am in there's the G fund for the TSP, the thrift savings plan, is like a government protected treasuries account, but preserve the they protect the share price, so it has a little bit less downside than regular treasuries. But we're about 80% protected in that sense. He was about, if I remember, 7% gold, 5% energy. Excuse me, and I think he had some real estate with with commercial real estate. My allocation was 80% that essentially cash slash T-bills, protected T-bills. 5% VXX, which is the volatility ETF, and that's a position that I watch daily. So 5% VXX, 5% energy in the form of ENPIX, which is a uh, basically the broad energy sector companies and oil. Um, 5% in DBC, which is a mix of base metals, precious metals, agriculture, and energy. It's a composite commodity play. It's an ETF from Deutsche Bank that trades on the regular market, TBC. Let's see. So, and then 5% I have on the speculative story stocks, which are like a daily, no overnight exposure, but a daily tactical play that I'm focusing on NVIDIA, Google, Rigetti, um, UMAC, which is that stupid drone company. So I have a little pool of money that I just do for intraday speculatives and all. So very, very little exposure otherwise. Now he and I both suffered in the I said precious metals, I think. Yeah. So uh energy, VIX, DBC, and the speculative. So that 5% in each chunk, so that, plus my 80% cash. So yeah, we were both a little surprised by the gold move. You wouldn't expect that. And that's one of the things you got to say is like, um, if you're following the rules and you have your exposures, it's still some irreducible amount of uncertainty and surprise that comes from having an exposure to an instrument, which has behaved in certain ways historically, but there's always a plus or minus in there. The move in gold, but really in silver, really surprised. Um, that would not be something you'd expect in times of crisis. And so when that happens, you got to take the hit. What that means is you had to have seen the far side of the or the other side of the trade when you put it on and said, well, I got my stops in, and and the result is what happened. And and you don't change your rule in the middle of the trade unless your risk tolerance got violated. Um, so that's what I would say on that one is the if you've got your stops in, if you frame that trade in both directions and you have your stop in and the price was an adverse move and it did not hit your stop, then that's just a fact
Mhm.
and your rules are intact. If it crossed the line and then you exited, that's also a fact. So the first and most important part of that is what was the sort of objective um, risk measure that you had in place which is a combination of position sizing and stop loss. So that represents,
Mhm.
the businessman's risk, and that's why it's there is because it offers an opportunity that should be greater than the risk-free rate of return, which today is probably just cash. I mean, Bob and I were both talking about that, even the 80% in T-bills that he has and the 80% I have in the government cash fund or the bond fund, the G fund, is not immune to risk. Um, so that's one of those things. And I'm gonna use that to segue into the AI, which is even with your AI, no matter how well you construct it, there's an irreducible amount of uncertainty. And at the end of the day, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because if you don't use it, there's opportunities for regret. If you do use it, there's opportunities for regret. And there's no amount of engineering that language logic model that eliminates the risk. ahead of time. All you can do is frame the risk. It's still a frog and it's going to jump, in some direction. So um, that's what I would do. What I would say is take a look at the way you framed the trade with gold and assess, do I have uh, did I frame it with a position size and a stop loss in mind? And then what happened with the move? If the move uh, uh, stops you out, then your rule worked. If you don't have a stop on that, then you gotta start with where you are and say, all right, I just bought the trade today. What's my objective stop loss measure?
Mhm.
And I paid a certain price for that decision. I would say uh, it wasn't an error, except the way you got to look at that is, instead of an error, you got to say, look, I I was in a trade with a, I don't know, 50% trailing stop or 25% trailing stop. It hasn't been hit yet. And my position size is either too much or too little. I suspect your position size was correct, for as a percentage of your portfolio. And in some cases, on the longer term positions, uh, the the allocation to the asset, even if there's not a stop loss in it explicitly, there's probably in your mind some calibrated level of where do I get out of that trade? And you can, if you haven't explicitly thought about it until there's a weekly drawdown, you say, well, that's the price I paid for not having that thing in play in place, and now I got to fix that right now by simply deciding today I bought the trade and where is my stop loss on it, and you know and then there's a scar on your arm, and that'll always remind you to frame it in both directions, have your position size and stop in place, and then moving on. We accumulate scars in life. So that's your methodology is sound. When was the last time in the last 50 years that out of nowhere we started a war, probably World War III, with little to no intention or plan, and after first destroying the relationships with all of our allies? When did we when did we do that? When were those market reactions baked into the price history that forms the basis of our rearward looking judgment about what's going to happen tomorrow? Well, nowhere. So these are extraordinary times, that's for sure. But the discipline that you follow through is to say, well, I am where I am, and now I gotta look at my portfolio, and for those things that don't have stops in place, I've got to frame those trades according to my logic and establish the risk and reward, and then make that decision, and then go forward and let the chips fall where they may, knowing that you've done your professional best on it. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's uh, the I got out of the final piece of my silver trade this week when it was like, did not see that coming. I had bought some silver within the last 10 days because it had fallen. I think last week I even talked about it. It had fallen from 400 to approximately 100, the AGQ. And it was
Yeah.
in the bottom of its 30-day trend. It had a 1, 2, 3 recovery, and there was still
Mhm.
in the tactical box, there was still a 2-to-1 trade,
Mhm.
and that's my signal to get in. So I bought that, and that was a 1 hour loss this week, and it's like caught me by surprise that in the sense that I wasn't expecting it. It sort of revealed that I was expecting it to work. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. And then I reviewed my rules, said, no, that was the trade I was supposed to take. And that was a piece of evidence that reminded me that there's two sides to every trade like that. But my position sizing was correct and the logic of the rules, and I would take that trade tomorrow.
Mhm.
You know, if it, I would probably play it tactically intraday first,
Mhm.
like I kind of always do with my hybrid swings, is that when I identify a swing trade I want to take, I wait and see what it's doing the next day and try to make money on it on a turbo,
Mhm.
which leads me to then leave a residual swing trade in place when the market closes. So I have some psychological comfort
Mhm.
and some monetary comfort that the trade has started to pay for itself. That's more of a feature of my personality, I think, than necessarily the right way to do things. There's, it's not necessarily true that a good swing trade should pay for itself intraday. Like there's some things like EWJ, Japan, which doesn't trade much during the US hours because it's tracking the Nikkei, which moves during the Nikkei session, but not much during the US session. That's something that can swing trade, but it's not a very good intraday trader. But these other ones really are more of a, when I am trying to turbo trade a thing and then keep a residual for a swing, that's more of a psychological stability mechanism for me. I have recognized that what I should do is I should be optimized for the targets intraday that are trading that day well intraday. The best opportunity to trade intraday today is not also always a swing trade that I'm trying to set up because of the swing trade season. If I was a purist, I would be trading intraday only on the targets that were ideal for intraday. And then later in that day, or somewhere in that day, I would have to have where I make a decision intraday, which is usually in the afternoon, to hold that position overnight, then that's where I should initialize that position. Um, but that's that feels more complicated to me, even as I'm describing it. That feels more complicated to me than
Mhm.
just saying, look, I've set up I've set up the silver swing trade that if it is above if it's above today's high, I'm supposed to buy it tomorrow as a swing trade.
Mhm.
So when I look at it today, if it's below that buy price, but there is a risk reward up to my entry that's favorable, and it's moving in that direction, I can go ahead and buy a turbo trade,
Mhm.
which is larger than the swing trade, and then just keep the swing trade overnight if it stays there. So that feels simple and contained to me. I'm not making a big shift in my attention span. And I think at that point it's more of a psychological element than it is a pure mathematical one. Because I'm relaxed when I do that, so it makes it easier to follow my rules, which is at the end of the day what I want. Well, I've talked that one to death. Was that helpful? Or does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Thank you. If I understood you correctly, I'd say you are treating precious metals not as I would say not as a future inflation protection. You're looking at them tactical
As a
at
disaster
the moment.
avoidance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
which is why the adverse move in the precious metals was kind of that kind of surprising. It was astonishing. I'll say was the my emotional response to that. It's like, wow, that just happened. Didn't see that coming. It's like it's throwing a knuckleball and say, well, there it went. And to be honest, that strengthens the case for it as an intraday target for this week, simply because the larger proposition that precious metals protect you in times of crisis, and now the price reward ratio, the risk reward ratio on it is better this week than it was last week because of the sell off. Anybody that wasn't going to buy gold said, or that was thinking about buying gold but didn't, is more interested in buying gold. They'll be cautious because they just saw that, whatever it was, a 5% sell off. But at the same time, their desire to own gold is understandable. So, so that's what I would say. I mean, maybe it was more a function of just tactical price manipulation on lower volume to drive gold down so that the countries that are buying gold with their sovereign wealth funds could buy in at a lower price with more volume. I, on That's speculation, but it is sort of legendary for being manipulated by banks and countries in tactical times. So yeah, that's what I don't look at real. I'm looking at it as a hedge against disaster, um, more than an inflation protection tool, which is the inflation protection tool. That trade is the commodity trade, which is the other element. That's the DBC sort of has a blended treatment of that, and the energy trade is more of a that's a short term. I wouldn't call it inflation when the price of oil goes from 100 to 200. Hadn't gone to 200 yet, but all the conditions are in place. Yeah, in one sense that's inflationary, but that's really more of a disaster than it is an inflation and the energy exposure there. If you look at ENPIX, that was strictly a play against geopolitical uncertainty and associated with Straits of Hormuz. So,
Thank you.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, so let me talk about AI. There's kind of there's three strands that I would talk about: strategic, operational, and tactical. Um, and the things that I've been working on, let's see if I can could have had this open. Yeah. I don't have graphic on there. Yeah, there's three strands on that: strategic, operational, and tactical with respect to trading. And the work I've been doing is like there's one strand that is specifically trading oriented, tactical trading oriented. There's one that's oriented on the system and market behavior and my relationship to it. So I would just call it more trading psychology, the psychology of decision making. And then there's the third piece, the strategic one, which is having a human AI relationship with AI. So the human AI relationship in all dimensions of decision making, of which trading is just one part of it. that's my favorite one right now. The current one is, so I've written actually a couple book length pieces of work on what I call the human AI relationship, the operating system. And it answers the philosophical question: how do I incorporate AI into everything that I do? What is my relationship to it? Recognizing that each day in every way, AI is manifesting in my own life and in the world around me because of the preponderance of AI in every operational aspect of public life. It's like, to rephrase it with respect to war, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. You may not be interested in AI, but AI is interested in you. Every piece of news that you read, the language that's being adopted in social media, all of that is being driven by AI. If you take a look at social media and the response to social media, the psychology of the masses being shaped by social media, that's the mass psychology being shaped by AI, because AI picks the topic as a function of what's making all the frogs jump. Let's do more of that. So that's an AI decision on what is trending. And then when they start directing people to what is trending, it strengthens the trend. And the language that it uses is designed to create emotional responses uh, to triggers. Well, that in a nutshell is the large social human AI relationship, and that is that AI picks the tune and the little people dance. Well, I'm not satisfied with replacing my brain with that of an AI algorithm designed for social media. So I have to live in a world in which AI is increasingly dominant in predictable ways, and I need a way to account for that. And so I have gone through a process of creating what I call the human AI relationship operating, the HAIR operating system. And in a nutshell, it has 5 documents. It starts with a manifesto, the statement of Declaration of Independence and Interdependence. It says, these are my principal values, identity, and core beliefs about my relationship with AI and the human as a partnership. It's going to be a long-term relationship built on trust, communication, risk management, mutually rewarding, and mutually supportive partners. So I'm going to cultivate my own AI that's operating in the larger ocean of AI in a way that is protective to me and developmental for me and opportunistic for me. So I'm going to define what that is in the manifesto. The very first statement is the human is the commander and the AI is the staff. The staff, the AI, is very much like the mythical second lieutenant in the army who is energetic, ambitious, motivated, action oriented, often wrong, never in doubt. So when we get a second lieutenant in the army, we assign him non-commissioned officers in a platoon to learn how to be an officer and how to survive while learning how to be an officer. So it's not the case that we ask a second lieutenant what we ought to do with our unit and then follow his guidance because He's not seasoned. He's not experienced. So at the same time, that second lieutenant is going to grow up to be a more senior leader, where we are going to start learning to trust his judgment and put him into positions of responsibility. So essentially, the second lieutenant is carefully monitored, and we're more concerned about the long-term consequences than we are the quality of his tactical advice on a given moment, right? So something like that is the HAIR belief number one in the manifesto. The human's the commander, the AI is the staff. The second maxim is it's a zero trust environment, and that is that every single claim, fact, statement, insight is assumed to be wrong until proven otherwise, and 100% verification of everything, independent of the AI, of that AI that produced it. Now, there's more maxims, and we'll see that as the fifth document at the end of this trail here. But those two maxims are so important that they found their way into the Declaration of Interdependence and Declaration of Independence that governs every single thing that I do. So that's the manifesto. That's it. It lays that out as a statement of beliefs and identity. The second document is the Constitution, and that is a broad legal framework based on our U.S. Constitution, in which the Article 1 power, the legislature, represents the AI, the executive represents the human, and the Supreme Court represents a separate independent AI that is checking all of the work of the executive branch and the legislative branch to see if it complies with the statement of principles laid out in the manifesto and the constitutional framework, that the AI is going to represent a lot of different points of view. I can model individual points of view with an AI agent, and then I can have a collection of those agents all considering a topic from multiple points of view, and then from that analysis, there may emerge a piece of legislation, a recommendation for action that the executive, me, approves and puts into action. And then before I push that button, the Supreme Court evaluates it to say, is this thing consistent with all of these values that we hold? So that constitutional framework is a broad, top-down force of law uh, um, guiding document. The third document is the Codex, Codex, and that represents the established law, established successful processes where I'm using AI. And it's like I had a situation or I had a problem or an opportunity. I did my AI human work, came to a recommendation, put it into practice. It's in accordance with the Supreme Court, and it's all supposed to work. It's working, and this is sort of like a proven solution to that particular problem. I still got to monitor it, still got to execute it, but it's a production level solution. Simplest example, uh, it has learned to write like me on my best day, um, for any kind of audience. So I know how to do that. I know how to, I have a prompt and I have style sheets and technical specifications that I can, with a few spoken words and some reference material, it can craft exactly what I want to say, exactly how I wanted to say it in a couple seconds, rather than me suffering through 15 or 20 minutes, period. So every writing effort now for me is 30 times more efficient than it was a year ago, and maybe 100 times more efficient than it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I hadn't written 30 book length field guides. Today, those are in hand and working. So that's what I mean by the codex. Those are instances where AI has solved a problem on an ongoing basis. And it's an example to me and to the AI about how to solve the next problem. Like it could be, hey, for this next prompt or this next agent that I'm building, start with an existing model that's working and then adjust it as necessary, which says, if you infer from that, you better save all your receipts and make your AI agents modular so that you can use pieces and parts that are of proven quality for the next thing that you do. So the manifesto guides, the Constitution describes the framework of action, the Codex contains examples of those projects in action. The fourth book is the Book of Standards and Forms, and that is all of the bulletproof, proven little pieces and parts of the successful projects. Here's an example. Among the writing that I have to do, I have to write executive summaries for senior leaders that correctly and proportionally describes the situation at hand in a way that is compact, concise, clear, and complete that they can rely on to kind of cut to the chase, right? That is a result. The process that I use to write an XSum and then the form of the XSum is locked in bulletproof for me. And it's a technical specification. And that's in the Book of Standards and Forms as a technical specification. So that in the future, if I'm doing a project, and part of that project is to periodically write an executive summary, then I already have the code for that. I can just drop it in and say, do XSum. Done. So the Book of Standards and Forms is the reusable templates and forms and tools and structures that constitute the machine that I'm making when I make an agent. The fifth book, I'm going to come back to the XSum in a minute because it's an important point. The fifth book is the Maxims for AI Machinists. So here's the thought process there. This involves failure mode and effects analysis. It's a habit you get into in industrial operations where you make a tool to perform some work, and that tool can malfunction and fail and kill you if you're not aware of it. So when I was in a machine shop, I was the unskilled labor, and we were making parts to make brake systems for family cars. If you're in that business, you better make good parts so that on their worst day, driving home through a snowstorm, that the brakes work under the most extreme conditions. And you need that to be done reliably for millions of cars. So there's zero tolerance for defects in there. So one of the things you have to do to make brake systems is bend metal tubing in a certain way so that you can snake that tube in the engine compartment and along the length of the car to carry hydraulic fluid from the brake pedal to the brake to stop the car. So you got to bend metal to specification. The machine that you use to bend that metal is a 30-ton hydraulic bender. that has two jaws, and you hook uh, the pipe into the clamps, then you push the actuator button, and then that 30 tons of pressure moves and it pulls the pipe around the bend, and then it slams into a metal stop that stops the 30 tons of pressure. Now, if you walk in between those two jaws, between the moving arm and the stop, you will get killed because it's 30 tons of metal, like a giant hammer hitting an anvil. So don't walk between the jaws. So when they bring me over to that machine to make 1,000 parts, where I take a straight piece of tubing and then bend it, they say, well, you're going to be bending some metal here today, Ken, but here's the 10 ways that this machine's going to try to kill you. So don't do this and do that. And to make it harder for the machine to kill you, we're telling you don't walk between those jaws. And then we're going to paint a big yellow stripe down that you would have to cross in order to walk between those jaws to signal danger. And then furthermore, we're going to put a metal gate around a fence around that so you don't accidentally cross that yellow line. And then we're going to put a gate in that fence so the guy that goes in to adjust the machine can do it under safe conditions. But we're going to put a lock on that so that you can't intentionally or accidentally walk it. So we've done everything we can to make that whole process idiot proof. That's called quality by design, that I'm not waiting for Ken to get killed and then try to fix it afterwards. No, I'm building that into the process. That's called, what I just did was failure mode and effects analysis. How could this machine go wrong? How could the process fail? How could the thing that I'm building fail? So when they're designing the brake system, they said, once we've built that out of our chosen materials, it's going to be in that car for 1,000,000 miles. How are all the ways that it could fail in the world? Where are the known weaknesses? Where is it under the most stress? What about heat and all that stuff? And so we use that analysis to find out how it can go wrong, and then we mitigate that risk by changing the material, strengthening the joint, and protecting it with a coating. We're going to do something to offset the risk of that failure mode. So when I'm using a prompt engineering tool to come up with my best prompts and I'm looking at all my examples in the usual way, before I just use it, I go through a failure mode and effects analysis that says, now, what's the history? How do these prompts fail, and what can I do to improve the prompt before I run it? So how did I come? I picked 100. I went through my 3 years of daily AI use, which is about 5,000 man hours in the last 3 years. That's literally 5 hours a day, every day of the last. I was working on AI stuff at halftime in the soccer stadium yesterday on a project with my phone because I sit at least 5 hours a day every day, and I save all my receipts. So I had the AI find all the best practices in the world, find all the known failures of AI that are testified to by people, and made a list of all the things that go wrong. And I said, now take a look at the 1,000,000 pages of work that I've done and find out, what kind of an AI worker am I? Am I doing the things to prevent failures? And where did my work fail that I needed to improve it as a lesson learned? So I came up with 100 faults, 100 failures, and then 100 maxims. So a maxim is a one-line entry that says, here's how we're going to prevent that failure from killing us. And then it ranked order in terms of importance. And then it wrote the code that I would include in a prompt to minimize the failure and minimize the damage of the failure if it occurs. And then ranked order it by importance. And the first two things at the very top of the list were so important that I moved them up into the manifesto, the absolute beliefs, and that is the human is the commander and the AI is the staff. And we operate in a zero trust environment all the time. I don't fasten my seatbelt in the car most of the time. I fasten my seatbelt in the car all of the time. It's not even something to consider. Hey, today's Tuesday. Is this a day that I'm going to put my seatbelt on? Well, yeah, because it's a day of the week that ends in Y. As I always. So now taken end to end, those 5 documents constitute the grand strategic vision of how I'm going to use AI everywhere and all the time, all the way down to the tactical things that I do to use it in a professional, safe manner. You say, well, Ken, if you know those 100 maxims and faults that they protect, why can't you just make an AI agent that automatically adds them to all your prompts so you don't have to worry about it? Good question. Why would I teach somebody about all those 100 maxims when I could just incorporate it into the tool that I have today? Because to achieve the vision established in the manifesto, my human brain has to be an active, skilled participant in every AI transaction that's looking for the 101st point of failure, that's actively questioning the AI's judgment, especially when the AI is confident, lengthy, and persuasive. Like what it does best is persuade you with language. And if you just follow along, you become a passenger on that train. You have relinquished your command responsibility, and I'm not going to do that. And so I use the specific language of commander and staff because 25 years and a combat veteran, that is ingrained in my DNA about the sacred duty of command. And I would never violate that. So that's why I use that language in order to program myself about how to respond to AI. It's why I chose that language when constructing this operating system for Army officers who are now being asked to use AI on the battlefield in new ways every day, because I want them to adopt that mentality of commander and staff and zero trust. Now, uh, the specific example I want to give you is the executive summary. If you just fire up a brand new AI and you say, hey, give me an executive summary of this article, it'll provide you something that looks really persuasive. Here's what it did. It looked up the word exsum and it says, it went out into its training database and says, what is an exsum? Oh, it turns out to be a summary of written text. And it's supposed to highlight, and then it says, here's what it's supposed to do. And in general, this is the kind of a format statistically that most people are looking for. And it goes through a bunch of probability efforts to parse that essay and then recombine it and rewrite it with a statistical probability of what the next word's going to be until it gives you an exsum. It's so good at that that it is persuasive that that's a really good summary of that essay. But is it? Do you follow along its little transparencies and decide what it has fewer words? What words did it cut out? What words did it under prioritize in that first essay? So I went through a process and said, look, an executive summary is not just a compression of the original material. It is a synthesis and an effort to make sense of it, to identify the thesis statement and to cut out extra stuff and repetition. And it's supposed to properly array the positions and postures of that author. Now, let's say that the author was writing about a contentious issue like, should the United States defend Taiwan if it's attacked? A gazillion words have been written on that with opinions, and those are part of the training set that trained a large language model how to write and how to think, so to speak. How much of the positional writing is part of its training? Like, if the preponderance of the writing was, yes, the U.S. should defend Taiwan, and this thing has given me an executive summary about some essay about that topic, is that going to make it lean towards saying, yes, we should, even if that's not in the essay explicitly? Is that going to influence the choice of words? Yeah, it's going to. So I went through an elaborate process of saying, what I want is not an executive summary. What I want is a cognitive analysis, a knowledge map, an argument map of that essay. I want you to parse every sentence, identify them by the kind of sentence it is, construct a logical Toolman argument model framework, evaluate the claims, the evidence, the opposition, draw a conclusion about the strength of the argument, reconstruct the argument in the most efficient, logical way, eliminate redundancies and unnecessary description and rhetorical flourishes that make it more persuasive. Just construct the knowledge graph to those specifications, and then construct a technical report on what that thing says, period. So that's what I mean. That's what I want. That looks a lot like an executive summary, and it is an executive summary, but it has an auditable process and a transparent reasoning that I can check its work. And I can give that same specification to another AI and tell it to do the same work on the same article. And then I can have a third AI compare the two executive summaries to see what I can see. And I can do enough executive summaries myself as test cases to see if the wording that's being used to govern that industrial process is correct. And when I'm satisfied that I have a professional standard, I can now name that as a procedure. I can have the format of the output as a standard template, and I can define the writing style that I want it to use, and I can make that part of my codex, and the pieces and parts is part of my. So that's what I mean by having an active mind. I'm thinking like a systems architect and designer instead of an end user buying something, toothpaste off the shelf and then using it. So that whole thing is what I would call the strategic line of effort with AI that affects everything that I do, where I'm using my brain. And when I'm using my brain, I use the AI in a certain way. When I'm looking at matters of my heart, or values, ethics, morals, and principles, I use it in a much more narrow construct. And I don't ask it to give me advice, but I ask it to check my choices against ethical standards in a confrontational manner, like a lawyer would, to see what are the ethical dimensions of this thing that I'm about to do that affects my values and profession. So, in matters of the head, full power with AI in my partnership. In matters of the heart, a more considered role like a lawyer. So if that's in general how I approach that, now how do I use that in trading, of which is of more interest? Well, I can use it to help set conditions in the planning and prepare phase where I can feed it my daily report, weekend report, and have it quickly find things that are of interest according to my interests. Like the things that I like to do in swing trading, it'll run through there and frame those out and lay out the decision support so that I can quickly assess what's going on. And I can look at the chart independently myself to see if the way it framed it actually makes sense. Hey, you told me that this was a 5 day down. I look at the chart, it's not a 5 day down. Therefore, I got to sort something out. Well, I'm using spreadsheets and math to produce swing trade signals, and it's telling me how to frame the swing trade. It's not finding the swing trade on its own because it's not as good at math as a spreadsheet is. So I use that in a partnership. So at the operational level, we're setting the conditions. I use the AI to help me with that. I use the AI to help train my emotions and my psychology so that I I can process negative emotion when I feel it by having a standard process for critical dialogue with myself. It takes a look at my statements. It asks me protracted coaching questions that are designed to challenge me to think about what I just said in a variety of different ways. It takes the sting out of the emotions and it allows me to be more thoughtful in the way that I think about issues and opportunities. So,
Ken,
yeah,
in that regard, do you have a specific prompt for that?
yes, I have a
Or
family of prompts. It has 15 different coaches. Each one is coded to ask me questions of a certain kind based on its logic model. Like there's a Socratic coach, there is a Native American medicine man spiritual coach, there is a lawyer type of a coach, there's a creativity coach. So anyway, there's about 15 different models of coaching that I've found that I've coded. And then based on the things that I'm talking about, my chief of staff model will pick 3 or 4 of those to examine the topic that I'm on to make sure that I'm getting challenged in my thinking from these different dimensions. So that's a form of critical thinking. The top level one, protreptic coaching, is an unusual style of coaching that comes from Aristotle and Socrates, which they developed to help the philosopher kings of Athens to think about their situation. The philosopher kings couldn't trust their advisors, and there was nobody else that they could talk to that had a similar challenge to compare notes. And so the only thing they could do was learn to trust their own judgment in order not to get captured by their own blind spots and bias. They talked with the Aristotle and Socrates using the protreptic method, in which the protreptic coach simply shines a light on what you put on the table and then asks you questions about the object of discussion from different points of view to say, how do you think about this from this angle? Surprise question. And then you, the persons, look for your immediate gut reaction, which in that theory is connected to your deep beliefs and subconscious and your values. And it bypasses the rationalization or the bias in your thinking because you never thought of it in that way before. So it asks you a question in a certain way, and then your initial response helps you see things about yourself at a deep level that you wouldn't have thought of asking yourself which is why it's important that the protreptic coach is able to ask you questions that are surprising, that you didn't expect, that follows up the trail of language to keep prompting and prompting and try this. What about that? How about this? See where the emotional responses are. You had some experience with that 3 weeks ago when we were talking about the surprising questions that coach model in the notebook LM, the 5 frames, that was asking you questions from different directions that were surprising that you found to be helpful. That is an explicit example of protreptic coaching. That's coded into that little notebook LM, that book of 5 frames. That thing also has an extensive technical library and an experiential library. So it has technical library of indicators and systems and other traders and other psychologists to draw upon, but it also has a vast amount of our direct experience from all our coaching sessions and the training seminars that go in there that represents collectively my work in the community of practice. So, one method that I use the AI for is to perform that kind of coaching function for me, rain or shine, in a systematic way. It doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be me on a good day being my own coach by myself. I hope I get it right. It starts with a really robust process of analysis.
So to understand a little bit more, would you consider the Notebook LM one of your agents? So
Yes.
how,
Yeah, it's actually a collection of agents
it is a
with an
collect?
agent in charge. There's a chief
Okay, all
of
right.
there's a chief of staff agent
I know. I was going to ask you
who
what is the form or the essence or the background and what is the concept of the chief of staff? What is the chief of staff
okay, a chief
normally?
of staff is my executive officer. It's the one that manages the staff. The staff is all of the sub agents that it can direct to do work according to their purpose and excellence. So, if I'm going to write something about this is typical. Um, the boss sent me some ideas he wanted me to evaluate and comment on. I can I can fire up my chief of staff and say we got a writing project for the 3-star general. And so whenever I say that, it's going to activate the Pen 3 prompt, which is the prompt engineering navigator, which is then going to go through a series of structured questions to extract from me the work project. What am I writing about? Who's it for? What does right look like? What should I consider? How many points of view? What's the output need to look like, etc. So the chief of staff calls the Pen 3 prompt in order to get a deep understanding of the work that should be done.
So does the chief of staff have all the prompts you've ever written?
Yeah, it has all the prompts are in that library.
Does it have all the manifesto and everything you explained? Does it
Yeah,
have codex, examples of codex? It has everything you've ever worked on?
yes.
Wow. All right.
So that's what's in the notebook. There's 350 million words of curated material in the 5 frames notebook.
So does the 5 frames have the prompts that the chief of staff does?
Yes, yes. Among those 350 million curated words are the 2 books of prompts that I've written, plus the 100 maxims for machinists, plus the Pen 3 prompt that designs my prompts according to the principles of the manifesto, in accordance with the dictates of the Constitution, using examples of all my other successful prompt practices, and the standards and forms and pieces and parts of those other prompts, plus the 100 maxims, all of those things, those 5 core documents are inside the Notebook LM. And so when I fire it up and say, hey, Chief of Staff, work process, new task, it fires up the Pen 3, it interviews me, it records that, it builds out the work to be done, and then it designs a workflow that should produce the thing that I need, and it drafts that out for my approval. It says, I've looked at your thing, and this is a task of complexity, this much complexity, that much uncertainty, this area. So these are the expert subagents that I think we need on this project. And I think it should have 5 phases, and it should start with some research, then some analysis, then a refined problem statement, a little more research if needed, drafting possible responses, developing those responses for your approval, and then coming up with your approval on the course of action we choose, and then it's writing that as a master prompt to govern that entire workflow. It's just laying out for me what a good professional workflow should be, and it writes a complex prompt that invokes agents, and then it says, here is my blueprint and my workflow proposal. Do you agree? Do you approve? And if I say yes, it will then start going through it in certain process according to those steps, and then it'll show me that it's work after each step for my approval, and then it'll feed forward into the next process to the next agent, and then it goes through that whole structure until I have the final product, which could be something like, hey, I want to write a book. I started off with that 100 maxims for machinists with the following initial conversation with the AI. Hey, AI, we need to incorporate failure mode and effects analysis into the way we design prompts. And so we went through it. Well, what do you mean by that? So we went through a research and it gathered 200 references on failure mode and effects analysis, compared that body of knowledge to the trading body of knowledge to see where there were natural alliances and alignments. And so it built up a theory of practice about what does failure modes and effects analysis mean inside a trading process. And because my trading process is designed to be an industrial production machine, it was enormously connected across plan, prepare, execute, and assess against system, self, and market. So at the end of that analysis, about 2 hours after I started that project, I had the book 100 Maxims for AI Machinists. Do you know how long it would have taken me 2 years ago to write that book? The rest of my life. Never. I would never have gotten all that done. The ideas were in there, but the follow through and doing all of the slave labor, the robotic labor, and systematic development. That's why I never had written the book before. There's too much to do. But now I have a chief of staff with an operating system that I just described, manifesto all the way down to maxims, that helps me with that. My brother wants to write a book, a field guide to help him as a hospice nurse, teach other hospice nurses how to give good end of life care to their patients and their families, and to give themselves self-care so that living in that high stress end of life environment doesn't burn them out. He's going to do that on behalf of the nursing staff in his hospital, his latest job. He knows a lot about that from his personal experience, and he wants to write a book on that. And the first obligation is to do no harm to his other fellow nurses. So we went through essentially the same kind of a process to gather the theoretical scholarly material from world-class academic journals, double-blind, peer-reviewed expert journals, science, and got about 3,000 references from the last 20 years that are associated with that topic. And we digested it and came up with best theoretical practices. We also investigated the world of experiential testimonies, people who had written about their own personal experience with that and what they did that worked and where it didn't work. And so we got a bunch of global testimony from the world of practitioners. And now we're going through a process of mining his 20 years of experience doing that. And between those three bodies of knowledge, we're going to construct adult learning curriculum that they can use at that hospital to teach their people how to give good care and how to give good self-care so that they don't burn their people out. The AI is the writing and research partner through all of that with great rigor, and the same rigor that I use to curate the 350 million words for trading. We built a notebook LM brain for his area of interest, and I'm taking the same sets of prompts with some minor tweaks to make it fit in his world. And that's an example of the reusability of code and leveraging the power of that AI machine with the human in charge of it to do that work over there. I'm doing the same thing for Army leadership to help them understand how to rapidly digest massive amounts of data, much of which is intentionally deceptive. And we've got to find ways to rapidly sort through all that to find good information in order to do targeting information in real time while we're in a war. So that's sort of like the executive summary process. The executive summary process I built had to contend with deception and incomplete information and fake news and that shit. It turns out that that's a good way to approach the summarization of any chunk of text. Anyway, those 5 documents from the manifesto all the way down to the failure modes is in direct support of all of those lines of operation. And so this week, when Bob Trader X has been working with me in the AI project from last year, we've been working together to develop a handbook for AI to evaluate my daily and weekend reports for the systems that he uses to manage his fund. He's a money manager with a nine-figure fund to manage. And so he's built a set of procedures that says he has identified that in the weekend report, there's about 7 different frames of reference independently that are looking at the market through the 7 different lenses. I talked about those last week. If I remember, if it was last week, it seems like a year ago. And what it does is automatically summarizes those things and puts the interesting pieces together and sets it up as an alert to say, here's some things of interest that you can act on. I framed them the way you want to frame them. So it's done all the staff work to set the table for him to review. And in a matter of minutes, he can do that, tuned to the way he wants to trade. So that's bespoke. That is, that's tuned to the way he wants to trade. But that's an example of a human AI relationship. And he has to have that as an accountable, visible, transparent process so that he can meet compliance demands from the SEC. So, in the same way that I want an exum that's transparent and visible, he's got to have a plan and prepare process that is transparent and accountable and auditable in order to demonstrate due diligence. So that's, I'm going to summarize then by saying there's a strategic level, an operational level, and a tactical level. Strategic level has to do with directions and goals and success criteria, manifesto. Operational is setting conditions and putting plans in place and deciding the sequence of doing work. That's the Constitution and the Codex. Tactical are the things that you're doing on that work project to work on the right thing, to set up your workspace, to use good tools, to design quality in and check it along the way, zero defects, and then harvest the lessons learned and the tools and parts to build out your tool room and your book of standards, and with strength given to the failure modes and effects analysis to prevent errors in the future or to reduce errors in the future with a mindset of continuous improvement based on statistics and math, because I'm using a industrial machine model for trading. So now if I think of that as vertical column, there's the world of trading, and then there's all the rest of the world. And the strategic, operational, and tactical lines of effort flow across all of them. So it turns out that what it means to be a good strategist in the world under any business effort is what it means to be a good strategist as a trader, and vice versa. How to develop good trading strategy uses the principles of strategic planning, and it is connected to strategy in other departments of life. Like when I do a strategic plan for our local soccer association, I'm using the same principles as I do if I'm planning a military campaign or if I'm planning a trading campaign. And then the way I organize that work and frame it up, there's a consistency in the approach in all the dimensions of their life. So the things that I learned about plan, prepare for trading has influenced the way I do plan and prepare for military campaign planning. A lot of the prompts that I've developed to improve my trading decision making and problem solving are things that then migrated into the tools that I've built for the Army. And the same way coming the other way. Some of the best processes that we use in the Army to plan and prepare have found their way into the prompts that I use for trading. Like plan, prepare, execute, assess. That's a straight lift from the Army's operational process doctrine. That's what we do. The military decision-making process is a rational utility model for semi-structured problems that builds courses of action, compares them, and then chooses. The Army design methodology is a strategy for unstructured problems. When it's not clear what the problem actually is, that's a process we follow in order to gain understanding of the world, to find problems we can work on, and then render those into subordinate problems and plans. The troop leading procedures is an Army problem solving model for very tightly structured problems where you simply diagnose and say, oh, it's that, and you get your proven trained tool and you follow through. Like how to frame a trade in both directions. Dude, that is the same on any time frame. I do the same thing every single time. That's a troop leading procedure. That's an efficient application of a tactical tool. So the Notebook LM, the book of 5 frames, basically includes that 350 million curated words of the best trading psychology that I could find after a 2-year effort of going into books and courses and academic journals and practitioner books and podcasts and interviews and all that stuff and my own trading practice. Uh, that was a 2-year process to write that book, which condensed 35 years of my own trading experience into the book of 5 frames. The first book, Foundational Trading, that is a broad architecture. That book represents sort of like the roadmap to the content of those 350 million words in Notebook LM. It identified all the models and thinkers and systems and rules and habits that have survived in my head and my trading, which is now about 40 years. That got built out into the Notebook LM. That book is one of the reference documents in the Notebook LM, the book of 5 frames. All of the other books that I've written with AI are in there as well, because it turns out to be an amazing research and writing assistant. So I've used it in that sense to help me build out all of the supporting material that I need in support of my ideas about, like, there's things in there about the Toyota production system and continuous improvement and quality control and the Shingo model of quality control. Those are things that are in there because when you're going to add quality to a system, it doesn't matter what kind of a system is. There are principles and procedures that you apply to improve its quality. Those are in there because I use that as part of my coaching. So as I start describing systems or looking at stats, it gives me insights about what to check and what to look for as a function of that body of knowledge. So the chief of staff prompt is about a 40-page specification that talks about how to diagnose problems, how to frame them, what kinds of critical thinking models should be implemented for a given problem set. Like it has the 100 mental models of Charlie Munger, who said an educated person making decisions, especially involving money, should be skilled in the use of 100 mental models. Those are listed at the Farnham Street. They wrote a book about it. Those models are all well known. They're part of the critical thinking catalog of literature. I mean, Munger didn't invent them. Farnham Street didn't invent them. They just wrote a book about how he used them. There's 188 cognitive biases that are known and documented by psychologists and cognitive researchers. Those are defined, and the remedial action, how to protect against them and how to fix them, that's in that Notebook LM. So that thing is that represents 3 years and 5,000 man hours of work in the area of decision making under uncertainty, both for trading and the military and for all professions that have that kind of environment to work in, if I can say it that way. High risk, limited information, catastrophic consequences, professional responsibilities, systematic performance, dynamic environment. That's what's in that book. So like every coaching session that we do gets digested into text files, analyzed into that executive summary. I said that cognitive template, and gets added in there as an efficient way to capture our insights and our leverage. And so that's influencing, all future work is influenced by the good work that we're doing and putting into that growing living brain. So that's the back. That's what I want to say about the AI. Now, I put out an offer yesterday, I guess it was, and what I told people was, look, it's like this coaching program. People that want to be actively coached by me, it's $3,000 a year, and it's the weekly sessions, and we work through that, and they get personalized performance coaching in a small group of like-minded individuals. They get personal coaching on that. The recordings of that go into that home study course, and they get to listen to everybody else's coaching as part of the agreement of building a community of practice. So that's $3,000 a year for guys that are actively being coached. The over-the-shoulder coaching program is for people that don't have maybe their systems to that level, or they're not ready for that degree of effort, but they want to learn from that. And I charge that for $1,000 a year because that's the best trading workshop in the world, I think, because you're listening to live traders working through systems and looking at how they're managing their systems with feedback, and you get to listen to 20 different people being coached every week, and you can find things that resonate with you, and they're kind of blazing the trail. I'm not doing personal coaching with those folks because that's what I do for the active coaching, but the passive coaching, get access to all the material and listen to all that stuff. Now, that's what we did in 2024 and 2025. In 2025, I started a separate line of effort for the AI initiative, and there was a dozen people that took me up on that. And together, we have been working on the things that I've been describing about, and I'm not going to list them all, but all the stuff that I've been doing for AI and trading and for the Army has been sort of driven by that project and those people, and they get all those materials, and I charge them $3,000 to be active. I charge them $1,000 just to listen in, $2,000 if they want to sit in a small group and talk about it, $3,000 if they want personalized work one-on-one, and $5,000 if they want me to develop a particular application with them just for them, like on a retainer. And I don't do that much of that because that takes a lot of time. So what I'm doing for 2026 is just an extension of that. I'm saying, hey, folks, in 2026, if you're interested in what we did in 2025, you might want to join the program in 2026 because you get everything we did in 2025 plus whatever was going to emerge out of 2026, and it looks promising. Don't know what it's going to be, but that's part of the risk of this world is, what are we going to work on? It's the most important things. Is it going to work? I hope so. Are we going to follow procedure? Yes, we are. We're going to follow the human AI relationship operating system with all of those prompts and all those features. And that's what I was working on last night in the damn soccer stadium, was building out an interpretive framework of a protreptic coach with the trail boss as the chief of staff. I went through about 200 hours of, programming effort on that so far to define what I mean by the trail boss, which is my own personal chief of staff for trading, and the way that I approach problem solving in general that combines warrior mentality, uh, Solomon's judgment, and Mike Three Bears' spiritual care for the people and the world and ethics. And then built out 10 planetary domains around those 3 central stars. And then with each planet having 10 moons that go deeper into each of those bodies of knowledge, and collectively using that as a frame of reference for the trail boss to engage in protreptic coaching with an individual who would come in and say, here's what I'm working on. Here's my work in progress. Like I built it also for my brother, because we're going to use that form of structure to create the protreptic coach for his nurses to talk to when they're struggling or they have questions. There will be a body of knowledge associated with nursing and caregiving, but the psychological dimensions are common between traders. Do you know who else? You know who else has trouble with emotional resilience and burnout and high stress environments with life and death consequences besides end of life nurses and hospice nurses and critical care nurses? Traders. That's a psychologically destructive environment if you're not prepared. That's like walking into the fire every day, into a fire of burning tigers who want to eat you. That's what trading is like to me. So, how do you prepare for that? Well, you prepare for that. You plan, prepare, you execute, and assess a personal emotional resilience plan that builds up your emotional bank account that allows you to operate at a professional level under dangerous circumstances without destroying your life. You know who else has to do that? Combat veterans. So that's the population of people that I serve. You know who else has that kind of problem? Every kid in America, because of the society that we've built for them. And why do I coach youth soccer? To help them start building the emotional resilience they need at a young age to survive contact with their parents and a school and a society that doesn't give a shit about them and will chew them up and spit them out, and social media that'll shred their lives if they don't have independent means of establishing autonomy and creating agency in themselves. So those are the 4 populations that I serve: end of life nurses, combat veterans, traders, and children. Oh, and the 5th population I serve are educational leaders like superintendents and principals and administrators. And I do that by teaching in a doctoral level education program at our local university where I'm the director of research methodology, in which I've created for them artificial intelligence agents that help them do their doctoral level research and which I use to evaluate their doctoral dissertations. All 5 of those things work together in those 5 dimensions are the 5 dimensions of my life. And I don't do anything outside of those 5. Nothing. But those things are all correlated and connected and mutually supportive. And the AI work that I do at the strategic, operational, and tactical level is designed to be excellent in all 5 of those dimensions and domains. So when I was putting together our manifesto for leadership for coaches to teach them how to coach kids, I followed the same principles that I did when assembling the literature, the scholarly literature and the testimonial literature and my own personal experience about coaching to put together the curriculum to teach our coaches how to teach soccer to kids. The same process I used to helping my brother develop the curriculum for his nurses, the same way I developed curriculum for traders, the same way I developed curriculum for military officers, the same way I developed curriculum for educational leaders and doctoral programs. All of that is the same work with a slightly different local context, but they share the same kind of environmental features. So you asked me a deceptively simple question about what is what am I doing with AI? That's what I'm doing with AI. The human AI relationship is an operating system that you must be a conscious, intentional, focused human in order to be the commander of that AI. And if you're not the commander, then you're a passenger on somebody else's bus. And I will not accept that in my own life. I didn't work this hard to let some other idiot drive the bus I'm riding on. For me, financial freedom is a means by which I can make the rest of that stuff happen. And trading is one part of that ecosystem. And it is in service to the principles that I describe in that manifesto and the work that I'm doing in the world. Trading is in support of that. It is a process by which I make money to fund the projects that I'm working on that need money. So I make money so that I can buy uh, Google AI services to perform work for me, etc. All right. That's my opening statement. And I gotta leave in about 10 minutes.
That's a great one.
Breakfast. So that's the background.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much. Can we spend 1 minute on the Trail Boss journey map?
The Trail Boss journey, the flashcard.
Yeah, the flashcard you sent us.
That's actually a really good top level. I actually used that when I was building out the Trail Boss agent, the coaching agent. And when I was building that in Gemini, I said, look, there are those three worlds in that solar system, or the three suns.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with the Trail Boss.
Let me find it.
What is the Trail Boss?
The Trail Boss is my persona when I'm teaching traders how to trade. I gotta find the flashcard. Just a second. Let me find it.
I do have the flashcard in front of me.
Yeah, but I'm gonna call it up so I could talk through it. I mean, I could talk through it by memory. All right, so the Trail Boss is like a one card operating system for how I trade and how I teach people to trade. You know, there's the you can see the plan, prepare, execute, assess fields in there.
Yeah.
And let me call. I want to talk to. I want to talk to the for the people that don't have that in front of their face.
Yep.
They might listen to this. So there was about 8 hours of recorded commentary on that is loaded up in the Trail Boss language model, the Trail Boss agent that I was working on last night. Let's see, file, open. Flashcard, score. Trail Boss play card. So that's another thing I learned was standard file naming. I know that I have that in some vast repertoire of flashcards, and it's flashcard, trail boss, play card. So let me find the let's see, share. And let me know when you can see that.
Okay, I can see it.
All right. And yeah, this goes from left to right. So this is how I see the market. The market is where actions occur, and it's you against everybody else. And each of you has tools, training, resources, and a team that prepares you to go into the marketplace to battle. I see it as a battle. And then they have their tools, training, and resources in a team. And the things that those tools, training, and resources and teamwork is supposed to do is make you effective in your actions out in here. But at the same time, there is this psychology element that is usually neglected because people are chasing technical skills and systems, and they neglect this is the self part of psychology, which I see as the biggest difference between professionals and amateurs. There's guys that call themselves professional that haven't sorted this shit out. Anyway, that's the basis of in system, self, and market. This is self. And then this whole thing represents, in my view of the marketplace, which is a combat environment. Check or hold?
Check.
Now, if I'm just talking about trading, I go this way. There's a list of candidate symbols that I specialize in, and then some of them fit into certain patterns that are my setups that there's a 5-day down, or there's my mechanical swing, and there's sniper patterns. So I've got a number of patterns that I'm going to prepare in order to establish trade frames that once the market opens and I'm in the execute mood, all I'm doing is following price and following rules. No thinking required, just repetition of trained behavior. These are the patterns that I use representative of the sniper. These are the techniques that I use on how to trade them intraday. Like these patterns simply say that the thing is prone to make big moves. Like there was a well-defined channel, turning points in the RL10. It has pulled back into the midpoint. It has compressed into a doji. If I take the mechanical entry outside of the doji, there is a 3-to-1 in either direction to get back to the measured levels of support and resistance. That is the fence sitter because it's right at the 50-yard line. That doji could have been down here, and then there'd be a 5 or 6-to-1 that way. And if it broke that support, there's at least 3-to-1 that way. That would be the catfish or the Godzilla. Now, with all of the ways that all the patterns I look for and all the ways I particularly trade them, I have one standard way of exiting all of the trades. I measure my initial risk. I get to no lose plus dinner for two. I ratchet my stops up, and then I will use a jump stop if there's a catastrophic move in my favor. Hey, there's a big gap up. Instantly lock in 70% of it. Jump stop. And then once the execution phase is over, I'm into the assessment phase, and I'm going to finish my work By taking a look at my daily AAR process, I consider plan, prepare, execute, and assess. What did I do good? What needs to be improved? What's the actions I'm going to take across all of the phases? And then that gets into my learning journal and debriefings. I try to improve by feeding that forward to make improvements to my practice or my systems. I use stats and performance charts to guide me with data, and I try to develop a coaching eye to coach others well so that I can coach myself well. And I try to teach you guys how to coach yourself, because by adopting a coach's eye, you will separate yourself from your trading persona and give you a little bit more emotional resilience. I use these principles of simple statistics to say, whatever the data set is I'm looking at, whatever the average is, plus or minus one standard deviation is normal. Outside of that is exceptional up and exceptional down. And about 2/3 of that data is in normal, and about 1/6 is abnormal. And I'm interested in the abnormally bad and abnormally good, because that's where the biggest change comes from. I start with a set of beliefs, but on the basis of evidence, I update those beliefs. And so as I get better and better pushing things up the hill, I use a wedge to lock in my learning so that I don't backslide and give it all back, in the same way that I use stop losses to protect the gains that I've made, keep 70%. Now, if I go below the line, this is the professional performance model that I use as a trail boss. As a trail boss, I am helping people that are in three categories of skill: novices and apprentices who are discovering themselves and the trading world. And then when they get to journeyman status and they can execute professionally, they are developing proficiency with coaching performance. Here I'm teaching, here I'm coaching, here I'm mentoring. When they are fully autonomous as traders, now I help them as a resource provider to help them discover their own purpose and to help them develop genuine expertise in the development of tools and in the application of tools. So that's where we are when it's just about maximizing performance. In the early stages, what I've learned is that there are probably, and this comes from my own practice and just from coaching people, that there's three primary obstacles to traders psychologically. One of them is that they're introverted experts, and it's hard for them to share, and they think they need to be the expert in order to be successful, but they have a hard time talking to others and trusting others. Reluctant leaders are people that have to, that's a person who doesn't want to have the responsibility for others, but find that they have to. And now I'm carrying that obligation. And so I'm not just trading for myself, but I got people that I love that are counting on me, and that adds to my stress. Learning how to overcome the challenges of being a reluctant leader is one of the difficulties in trading. Being an anxious perfectionist means I am burning up my emotional resilience by worrying about things and then trying to make things perfect because I haven't understood how good is good enough. Sometimes good enough is good enough and I need to move on. So in the discovery phase, you're discovering yourself while you're in motion and you're paddling for your life to get away from the waterfall. Once you get positive expectancy systems that are reliable, that you can trust, and learning to follow your rules, You're in the development phase. And now you got to get in front of the wave, surf on the energy, learn to look around for the next opportunities. And now what you need to develop are these are these are personas that I have to overcome or harmonize or just help them survive. And it really is, don't be the extreme forms of these, just be a good trader. And then once I'm there, I need to have the emotional resilience of a badger who's a fighter and has thick skin and will protect his family to the death and is going from point A to point B. And I dare you to get in my way, rain or shine, summer, fall, winter, spring, doesn't matter. I'm going. Persistence. The introverted expert has to learn how to become a fighter. The reluctant leader has to learn how to first to know what to look for as a mindful scout and learn those qualities so that later when they're a Dharma warrior, they can choose their own path. A mindful scout is learning how to read the environment. The anxious perfectionist just has to be replaced with a diligent student and go through that process of acquiring and maintaining the knowledge. That's what the Notebook LM is amazing for. And then the persistent badger ends up being a good teammate and a resourceful catalyst. Sometimes you have all the pieces and parts of a system, but it's lacking one thing, and that is the willingness to get in there and suffer and go for it and do the hard work. And sometimes that's all you need to make the thing work. And then the diligent student, because of their effort, has become a master craftsman. So the 10th persona in here is the trail boss, who can meet you where you are, do the things to improve, move you into development, become a coach. When you've moved that to your self-actualized, like Trader X, we can now work as mentors together and work on those personas. This is the hard work, except this is really hard work too. This is just pick your battle or choose your adventure. So that's the Trail Boss playing card for the performance model. That is the mindset that I use when I'm going through these coaching sessions, is I try to identify where you guys are and meet you where you are and move you in that direction. This is the basic template that I use, that all those patterns are just different forms of that. Where is the doji? Where is the range? Where is the abnormal range compression? And then here's where the initial risk, no lose plus dinner for two, keep 70%. Sniper mentality when executing targets that were framed in a standard way from those patterns. Standard work to study my performance and feed forward, lock in learning, understand the difference between normal and abnormal, and have a structured way to do it. And then these are the call signs for this one down here is the idea that in a given trade, I'm going to make 10 decisions, and they're all based on reward to risk ratios and trade frames. The first one is special, it's how I get in. The last one is special, it's how price gets me out. But most of the decisions are simply, how do I adjust my stop in here? Oh, take my initial entry of risk, get to no lose plus dinner for two, satisfying. Start locking in gains as it goes up the level with a ratchet. And then maybe if there's a gap up on a swing trade, jump stop and move that up and lock in 70% of the gain. And then maybe it's time, as this starts to roll over, as we've talked, hey, that's enough. and implement a sniper exit as a command override, or just wait for the retain 70% profit model. So that's what I mean by the taken as one. If you were to ask me to just draw one chart of how I trade and how I coach and teach and mentor, it's right there. There's nothing that I do that is mission critical that's not on that chart. 100%.
Got it.
All right. So that's that.
Right. Right.
And it's 9:00 and I'm 9:04 and I'm 4 minutes late.
All right. Well, thanks
He's
very
gonna
much.
beat my butt. Anyway, I'll get this posted and recorded in the recording posted in the usual way.
I've got 2 weeks of sharing with you next week. I'll share
Fair
with
enough.
you guys my useful color.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thanks.